The war had already torn Europe apart when the group of German women was captured. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. Many of them had been nurses, clerks, or simply swept into the machinery of war against their will. Yet by the chaos of 1944, they found themselves branded as enemies of the Allied forces. The capture was sudden, a blur of shouts, weapons raised, and the sound of boots on broken ground. Fear bound them together as they were herded like shadows of a defeated nation. They expected punishment, humiliation, maybe even death. For weeks, rumors had spread among them, stories of prisoners being shot, of endless labor camps, of cruel interrogations. No one knew what awaited them, but each woman carried the weight of dread like a heavy stone in her chest. The journey began with cramped transport trucks, winding through bombed villages and roads lined with ruins. From there, they were packed into ships, dark, suffocating hulls that smelled of rust, salt, and fear. The Atlantic crossing was long and brutal. The sea rocked them mercilessly and many fell ill, clutching their stomachs as the ship carried them farther from the only land they had ever known. At night, when silence reigned except for the groan of the ocean, whispers filled the air. "What will they do to us?" one woman asked, her voice trembling in the dark. "America is worse," another replied, echoing the propaganda they had grown up with. "They hate us. They will break us." But there was one among them, Anna, only 22 years old, who dared to hold a sliver of hope. "Maybe it won't be as we've been told," she said quietly, though even she doubted her own words. When at last the ship reached the shores of the United States, the women were brought to the deck. The coastline stretched out before them, nothing like the shattered cities they had left behind. Instead, they saw green fields, sturdy houses, and the distant sprawl of a land untouched by war. It was strange, almost unfair, that life could continue in such normalcy while their own world had collapsed. The buses that carried them inland moved past rows of farms, where children played in yards and women carried baskets of food, as if nothing extraordinary was happening. The prisoners pressed their faces against the glass, too stunned to speak. Could this really be the country of their enemy? Arriving at the camp, their fear only deepened. High fences loomed. Watchtowers stood like silent sentinels, and the gates closed behind them with a metallic thud that echoed in their bones. But inside, what they encountered was not at all what they expected. Instead of squalor, the camp was organized and clean. The barracks were simple but sturdy, the beds lined neatly with blankets. A dining hall served food, real food, hot and plentiful. There were even books stacked in shelves and a bulletin board announcing activities. The women exchanged stunned glances. None dared to speak of it aloud, but the same thought rippled through their minds. This isn't what we were told war would be. That night, as Anna lay in her bunk staring at the wooden ceiling above her, she felt a strange unease. Not from fear, but from confusion. How could an enemy show them such humanity? And then, something happened that none of them had ever imagined. What did these women witness inside those camps that changed their perception forever? Stay with us as we uncover their shocking discovery. And tell me, if you were in their place, what would you have expected upon arriving in the United States? The first days inside the camp were filled with silence and suspicion. The women moved carefully, as if every gesture might be punished. But instead of cruelty, they encountered routine. Guards handed them meals without insults, doctors checked their health, and most astonishingly, no one shouted at them. Anna sat at one of the long wooden tables in the dining hall, staring at the plate before her. Mashed potatoes, vegetables, and a piece of roasted chicken. It was far more than she had seen in months back in Europe, where food had been rationed to the bone. She looked around, expecting someone to snatch it away, but instead, an American soldier simply said, "Eat. You'll need your strength." The words were not harsh, not mocking, just ordinary. For many of the women, this was more unsettling than outright hostility. If the Americans were their enemies, why weren't they treated as monsters? Why did the guards act as if they were simply human beings? As days turned into weeks, the women began to notice details that contradicted everything they had been told. In the camp library, they found English books, newspapers, even German literature that had been donated by local townsfolk. Some of the women dared to open them, reading quietly in corners, rediscovering a part of themselves that war had tried to erase. On Sundays, church services were held for those who wished to attend. To Anna's astonishment, even religion was respected. A local pastor came into the camp, offering sermons of peace and forgiveness. Sitting in the small congregation, she felt both comforted and conflicted. Was this mercy genuine, or some sort of strategy to weaken them? One afternoon, while working in the camp garden, Anna caught sight of something beyond the fence. A group of American children was playing catch in a nearby field. Their laughter floated on the breeze, unbroken by air raid sirens or the fear of bombs. The sight struck her harder than any weapon could. For the first time, she realized what life could look like without war's shadow. The turning point came when the women were asked to help with light labor in nearby towns. Escorted by guards, they expected to be scorned or spat upon by the locals. Instead, they were met with cautious curiosity. In one small grocery store, an elderly woman handed Anna an apple. "You look too thin," she said gently. The words stunned her. She had prepared herself for hatred, but not for kindness. Holding the apple in her hands, Anna felt tears sting her eyes. Why would an enemy give her something so simple yet so precious? The friendships that began were subtle, unspoken at first. A smile exchanged, a door held open, a brief word of thanks. Slowly, the walls of suspicion started to crack. Some American women, seeing them not as soldiers but as young girls caught in the tide of war, offered small gestures of humanity, a piece of fabric, a bar of soap, or a kind word. But kindness came with its own weight. For every warm interaction there was an inner conflict. Some of the German women whispered among themselves late at night, their voices sharp with guilt. "We cannot accept this," one hissed. "They are our enemies." "Do you forget who we are?" Anna remained silent during those moments, her mind torn. Was it betrayal to see humanity in those across the fence? Or was betrayal refusing to acknowledge it? The camp, once seen as a prison, began to feel like something else entirely. A mirror that forced them to confront not only their captors, but themselves. And yet, beneath the surface of this strange new life, a question grew louder every day. If this was the enemy, what did that mean about everything they had been taught to believe? The answer was about to reveal itself in a way they could never forget. What powerful moment would finally shatter the walls of suspicion and change their perception forever? Weeks turned into months, and the once fearful routine inside the camp transformed into something the women never expected, a rhythm of life that resembled fragments of normalcy. They worked, they read, they even laughed among themselves. Yet beneath it all lingered the same haunting question. Was this kindness genuine or simply a mask? It was during one cold morning that Anna encountered the moment that would forever shift her understanding of America. She had been assigned, along with a small group of women, to assist at a nearby farm. The guards watched carefully but without menace as they walked down the dirt path. The farm belonged to the Miller family, a husband, wife, and 2 children who had lost relatives in the war overseas. The women braced themselves for hostility. But instead, Mrs. Miller greeted them with cautious warmth. "Work is work," she said simply, handing them baskets for gathering vegetables. Her voice was steady, not cruel. She treated them as workers, not as enemies. As the day wore on, Anna found herself beside the Miller children, who were no older than 8 or 9. They giggled as they tried to teach her simple English words, pointing at objects and repeating them slowly. Apple, cow, sky. Anna, hesitant at first, echoed them in broken syllables, her accent heavy, but her effort sincere. For a fleeting moment, the war disappeared. She was not a prisoner, nor an enemy, just a young woman learning words from children under the wide American sky. Later that evening, back at the camp, she shared the experience with the others. Some scoffed, warning her not to be deceived. Others listened quietly, secretly longing for the same connection. But what struck Anna most was not just the kindness of strangers. It was the realization that these strangers had every reason to hate them, yet chose not to. The contradictions deepened when Red Cross volunteers arrived at the camp. They brought letters, parcels, and supplies, not only for the prisoners, but for the guards as well. The equality of treatment was something the women had never imagined. Anna held in her hands a small parcel that contained soap, chocolate, and a scarf knitted by someone she had never met. Attached was a note in English, translated by a fellow prisoner. No one should suffer without comfort. That night, Anna cried quietly into her pillow. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time in years, she felt seen as a person. However, this awakening did not come without turmoil. Within the barracks, arguments broke out. Some women condemned Anna and others for accepting gifts and kindness, accusing them of betraying their homeland. "We are Germans," one woman spat. "Do not forget who you are. Their smiles are weapons." But Anna could not forget the children's laughter, the apple given freely, or the scarf knitted by unknown hands. Each act of humanity etched itself deeper into her heart, erasing the lines she had once thought were unbreakable. The tension between loyalty and compassion built like a storm. One evening, while watching the sunset through the fence, Anna whispered to herself, "Maybe the war has lied to us all." And then came the event that none of them could have prepared for, an invitation. The camp commander announced that the townspeople had organized a small Christmas gathering and that selected prisoners would be allowed to attend. The news rippled through the camp like wildfire, disbelief, excitement, and fear mixing into one. Could it be real? A Christmas celebration? With the enemy? Anna's heart raced. Something told her that this night would change everything. Snow had begun to fall the night of the Christmas gathering. The prisoners selected to attend were nervous as they stepped outside the camp gates, escorted but not shackled. Anna clutched her thin coat tightly around her shoulders, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. She felt the weight of every step, her mind torn between fear and wonder. The gathering was held in a modest community hall in town. The wooden building glowed with warm light spilling through its windows, and the faint sound of carols drifted into the night. As the women entered, their eyes widened. A large tree stood at the center, decorated with candles, ornaments, and paper garlands made by local children. The air smelled of cinnamon, roasted meats, and pine. Anna hesitated at the doorway, expecting stares of hatred. But instead, she was greeted by hesitant smiles. The townspeople who had lost brothers and sons in battle still chose to open their doors that night. It wasn't easy. Anna could see the pain etched on their faces, but it was real. The prisoners were offered seats at long tables. For the first time in years, they held mugs of hot cider, plates filled with bread, ham, and pies. At first, the women ate in silence, uncertain how to behave. Then, one of the local children approached. A little girl with golden braids placed a handmade paper star into Anna's hands and whispered, "Merry Christmas." The words, simple yet powerful, shattered Anna's composure. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched the fragile star. Around her, other prisoners exchanged looks of disbelief. This was not propaganda, not a performance. It was kindness, raw and undeniable. Throughout the evening, moments unfolded that blurred the lines of enmity. An elderly American farmer whose son had been killed in France raised his glass and said quietly, "Tonight we are not enemies. Tonight we are just people." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Music soon filled the hall. A piano played familiar carols and voices rose together, some in English, some in German. Anna joined softly, her voice trembling as the melodies bridged languages and grief. For a few hours, war ceased to exist. But beneath the warmth, tension simmered. Not all townspeople approved. At the edges of the hall, some whispered angrily, their eyes sharp with resentment. A few left in protest, unable to accept such closeness with the enemy. Anna noticed this too, and guilt tugged at her heart. She wondered if she deserved this kindness while others suffered. Later that night, as the gathering ended, Mrs. Miller approached Anna once more. She pressed into her hands a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "For later," she said with a faint smile. Anna tried to speak, to find words of gratitude, but all she managed was a tearful nod. As the women walked back to the camp under the quiet snowfall, silence surrounded them. Each carried something more powerful than the gifts or the food. They carried the realization that the enemy had chosen compassion over vengeance. That night, lying in her bunk, Anna stared at the paper star the child had given her. She knew she would never forget it. She also knew that when she returned to Germany, if she returned, nothing would ever feel the same again. But the war was not yet over, and fate still had more to reveal. What would happen when the war ended and these women had to return to their homeland, forever changed by what they had seen in America? The end of the war arrived like a storm breaking after years of darkness. In 1945, the announcement of Germany's surrender spread quickly through the camps. Cheers erupted among the guards in nearby towns, but inside the barracks of the prisoners, silence reigned. For Anna and the other women, the war's end meant freedom, but also uncertainty. Soon after, they were told they would be repatriated. The news stirred mixed emotions: relief, fear, and sorrow. Many longed to see their homeland, yet they knew it was no longer the Germany they had left. Bombed cities, families torn apart, and a nation in ruins awaited them. More than that, each woman carried the invisible weight of memories from their time in America, memories that would clash with the bitterness waiting at home. The farewell to the camp was unexpectedly painful. As they packed their few belongings, Anna slipped the paper star from the Christmas night carefully into her pocket. It was fragile, worn from months of handling, but it represented something greater than survival. It represented proof that kindness could exist in the unlikeliest of places. On the day of departure, the Miller family came to see the women off. Mrs. Miller pressed Anna's hands and whispered, "Live your life, not your war." Her words struck deeper than any goodbye. Anna wanted to answer, to promise that she would remember, but her throat tightened, and all she managed was a nod through tears. The ship that carried them back across the Atlantic felt colder than the one that had first brought them. The women no longer clung to fear but to memory. Each night, Anna closed her eyes and pictured the orchard, the children teaching her English, the Christmas star glowing in her palm. Germany was unrecognizable when they arrived. Rubble filled the streets, hunger gnawed at every household, and suspicion poisoned every conversation. When Anna tried to share her experiences in America, she was met with disbelief, or worse, hostility. "You speak like a traitor," one former comrade accused. "How can you praise the enemy?" But Anna refused to let those words silence her. She knew what she had lived. She had seen compassion from those who had every reason to hate her. She had sung carols with strangers across the lines of war. She had been treated not as an enemy, but as a human being. Years passed and the war faded into history. Yet Anna carried the lessons of her captivity throughout her life. She married, raised children, and built a modest life in the ruins of post-war Europe. But she never forgot the nights in the American camp, the laughter of children, the warmth of a loaf of bread given by hands that should have been hostile. In her old age, Anna often told her grandchildren, "Do not let anyone tell you who your enemies are. People are not enemies. Only hatred is." Her words became a family legacy, a reminder that kindness is stronger than war. The women who had once crossed the ocean as prisoners returned to their homelands as witnesses of an extraordinary truth, that humanity can survive even in the darkest of times. And though their stories were rarely told in history books, their memories whispered a powerful lesson. War divides nations, but compassion unites hearts. As Anna looked back on her life, she knew the greatest battle she had ever won was not survival, but the courage to believe in goodness, even when the world insisted otherwise. This story reminds us that even in the darkest times, compassion can break down the strongest walls. What do you think? Can kindness truly heal the wounds of war? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories that reveal the power of the human spirit.